This is Dan Grazier, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Dan and I were talking. We have a common friend, Peter Van Buren, and I love Peter because he wrote a book called We Met Well, and we talk about a lot of these issues when we deploy. There are so many problems, Dan, like multi-system problems, multi-echelon problems that cause us to get in our own way, so that when we go somewhere really complicated, we struggle to not make mistakes that undermine our own success. Forget about tethering tactics to the ground, and the strategy. Forget about that. Forget about taking. This is the thing I'm curious what you think about. This is where I want to start. One of the things we did was, okay, so I'm at an outpost, and the ANA, the Afghan National Army or police are there, right? And then they need supplies, and so I'm like, oh, it's a great exercise in seeing how the system works. Mohammed, when you request these things, will you let me know? And I'm gonna shadow it. I'm gonna track that request and see how long it sits at each location, because I should be able to, in theory, at least follow the American side of that chain. And for the audience, the chain is partner to partner, Afghan to American, all the way up to the supply person who you request it from at the level that it goes to, and then all the way back down to that person. So I should at least be able to follow it on the American side. Would it surprise you, Dan, to find out that I could not make that request go in a way that I was able to track? And not only that, an American killed the request sight unseen, or person unseen, because he knew that the guy that I was working with was a bad guy. So he just canked the request because he decided it was not a valid request, and nobody gave a fuck. Nobody cared.
Yeah, I totally see that happening. Particularly overseas, in a chaotic situation like Iraq or Afghanistan, there's so many different people doing so many different things that it's virtually impossible for the right hand to know what the left hand's doing. And the other thing is, when you're in that kind of a situation, you have so many different people that are trying to make a name for themselves and to make a career for themselves that they will do anything they can do, really, to take credit for any success, and occasionally throw the monkey wrench at somebody else's head to prevent them from having success. Because, quite frankly, you get promoted in the military by your billet accomplishments, and so you're going to do whatever you have to do in those kind of situations to make sure that box in your fitness report is as full as possible.
Yeah, the full fitness report box is definitely part of it. I can imagine the person that I talked to that killed the request. I imagine that guy reported that as a win. I stopped corruption today, even though what really and maybe he did. He doesn't know that. And then it's funny how we get these perceptions of whoever our partner is. And we like our partner, but we don't like anybody else's partner. They're all dirt bags and basket cases. These are all words I've heard before. I've heard worse words than this. And so when you have your partner, if you don't partner internally, there's a lot of problems with communication. Like, what is your goal to try to get this guy to do? I want to do this. Okay, how does that apply to my guy? Okay, great. Is there any place for us to work together? That never happens. That is not a norm. No one's trained to do that. So I guess for the audience, what I'm saying is the military and State Department, the Americans don't communicate vertically and horizontally. They just communicate with their pod, their person, and they work to try to improve that person in a vacuum. And there's no other external systematic test. So you want to have resources go out to the population so that they can believe in their government. No one's testing for that to see if the government actually can create an outcome that's positive, that the locals will believe is positive.
Right. Well, and a lot of times those efforts are not just wasteful, but they're actively counterproductive, because the big problem in a lot of these places where we operate, the culture of backsheesh is real. And corruption is just kind of a part of everyday life, unfortunately. And we ended up contributing to that by going over there with bags full of money and just tossing it around without really understanding who the key players were in a lot of cases, and understanding is this really a good guy who's looking out for for the population, or is he trying to pad his own pockets, or pad the pockets of somebody else who's part of his like favored clan or tribe? And and in the course of doing that, the population sees this, and they see all this money, this foreign money that's coming in, and then it's getting spent on things that benefit this guy but don't benefit the population. And so we ultimately end up eroding trust in the population, who is our target audience. It's not the officials, it's not the government. Like in this kind of a situation, like in Iraq and Afghanistan, our target audience was the population, and in a lot of cases we ended up alienating them by fueling corruption that negatively impacted their lives.
Yeah, whenever people talked about corruption, I knew that I had an American that wasn't good at what they were doing, because we are the corrupter. And until we can limit our corrupting force, we are the corruption. And then there's a cultural problem too. It's really important to slow down and talk. You said a wonderful, a brilliant thing. When we look at someone and decide if they're corrupt, we have to be good at culture first before we can even say that, because the local commander is like, I don't have enough money to handle all of the things because my budget doesn't work. So we pool all of our money together and I buy food. Does that guy make a little bit of money doing that? Sure. But the government isn't giving him money to do his job. And so what's the problem here? It's because our system is not working. He therefore has to find another means to accomplish this. We had a wheat seed distro where there was a bunch of farmers trying to get wheat seed, and we were pointing the fingers in all these different directions on why this wasn't going to work, and kept reminding, like, tell those Afghans not to eat the seed. It's not meant for eating, it's for planting, and saying it over and over and over again. And I would take this to the Afghans and say, you're not supposed to eat the seed. You know what they'd said to me? Like, we're farmers. We've done this for years without you guys, and we've also done this program with you guys for years. We know not to eat the seeds. Can we talk about something else? Like, who really needs this seed? Like, well, wait, what do you mean who needs it? Like, there's people, like, I don't need any. I'm doing well. But that farm over there, you guys have no idea who needs this stuff. And we want the governor to do this for us. So the governor does, and we lost our minds. Oh, the governor is corrupt. He's selling wheat seed. No, he's not, But that's how challenging this stuff is. Who else could do a better job, though, than the military? Who's got the footprint to do this kind of stuff well? Should we even be doing this stuff?
Well, the should we be doing this is a really, that is the ultimate question. And that's honestly not a question a lot of times for the military to do, because the military ultimately doesn't decide where they go. Those are our political representatives in Washington. But in the military, I actually did a big report about this last year, and it was an extension of some work that I had done while I was in the Marine Corps about 10 years ago about creating cultural operators. And the report that I did last year, it focused a lot on the Army's security brigade, the security force assistance brigades that have been stood up. That was one of General Milley's big initiatives when he was the chief of staff of the Army. And that was something that I had been calling for a lot of years, just based on my experience in Iraq in 2007, where I saw a lot of these wasted efforts. Now, I was a tank platoon commander, so I'm rolling around with my 4 tanks, which gave me kind of a unique perspective, because I did get to observe a lot of different units and a lot of different battle spaces when I was over there, just as when we were conducting some of this support. And I noticed that, that hardly anybody really understood I don't really like the phrase human terrain, but they didn't really understand the cultural background and history of where they were operating. And I observed that in 2007, and in 2013, I was horrified when I got there I was an individual augment and a mid-season replacement. I was horrified when my boss mentioned something. I made a joke about the British in Afghanistan, about why it's kind of a bad idea to have the British in Afghanistan. And my boss, who had been there for 8 months at that point, had no idea about the history of, not just the British in Afghanistan, but how Afghanistan had been created. And what the geographic significance of it, the historical significance of the country, where he'd been operating at a pretty high level for 8 months at that point. And so going back to the report that I did last year about the SVABs, if the United States is going to continue sending the military around the world to do these kind of missions, we need to have people who specialize in doing these kind of missions. And, you need what I call cultural operators. You need people who have a focus and a knowledge of the language, the history, the politics, of these areas, and they can be scattered all through the services. And if the flag goes up tomorrow for us to go, I don't know, to Bolivia, then the military can look through the records really quick and like, all right, these are all our Bolivia specialists, and they're scattered all over the place, but we're going to bring all the Bolivia specialists in, and then they're going to get attached to the units that are deploying to Bolivia. So we have people who understand these kind of issues, so that we don't start making a whole bunch of mistakes at the very beginning and then try to fix them later on, which is what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, where after we'd been there for a while, we realized that, it'd be a good idea if we had people who could speak the language and who understood the culture. So we're gonna educate people to do this. Well, if you have that at the beginning, then maybe we can avoid making some of those mistakes, so we don't have to go back and fix them later on when it's a really, really difficult proposition to do so.
Yeah, we do. We literally got in our own way much more than the enemy ever befuddled us. I mean, every answer was a military answer. And you think about your pre-deployment training, it primarily involves going and driving around in tanks at NTC. And maybe most of the war, a combat arms guy, long guns, infantry, whatever it's going to be, they don't. I mean, I actually love to use tanks as an example. Like, it's death before dismount. That's the phrase. And the moment you get to Afghanistan, dismount. You don't touch your tank ever. And so you have this thing where you're completely unprepared. And then here's a couple of problems with the SFAB concept. The idea is there, but organizationally, we're not prepared to do it. So there is no professional level resident course on how to use an interpreter. It's just made up. It's all ad hoc. So you already can't partner. The cultural operators you're talking about, I think that the basic is don't waste time teaching them a language, because it's too compartmentalized. Teach them to have cultural acuity first, so that any cultural situation they go to, they're already miles ahead of the person that doesn't have it. And having an actual ability to use CQ to your advantage is invaluable. But they're worried about how many push-ups you can do and trying to make it like a light special forces unit. And I've been desperate trying to help those guys. Like, there's real things you guys can do and plan on, and capacity you could create. But they're more worried about how fit you are. And ask me how many push-ups I've done in combat, Dan. Ask me. I'm going to tell you the number.
Oh, yes. How many push-ups have you done in
Zero.
Yeah.
No one's ever asked me to do a push-up. I mean, it's just it's crazy. So that goes back to the question is, since we suck so badly at preparing for this fight and don't want it, how do we say no when atrocities happen and we're desperate to go help?
Yeah. Another really great question. Well, and that's an important question, because it speaks to the very heart of the culture, the institutional culture of all the military services. This can do, like, never say no culture. So the services all take on so many missions where they're stretched to the breaking point. I mean, you're seeing this in the Navy now. That culture contributed to the ship collisions back in 2017, and it contributes to this to the readiness crisis that all the services that have aviation units, the Air Force, definitely the Navy and the Marine Corps are suffering now. Because no one gets promoted in the military by saying they can't do something. Right. And you learn the bias for action. I think I probably heard that my first or second day at officer candidate school in Quantico. So you grow up marinating in that kind of a culture. So 40 years later, when you are a service chief and you're asked to provide forces for yet one more mission, overseas mission, you're conditioned to not say no. And it's a problem. I don't know if we need to solve that, all the way back at the basic training level. or I'm at the professional school level. I'm not entirely sure, but it is a cultural, institutional culture issue that the military has.
We've also got some fatal flaws in our doctrine. I mean, obviously, we should. So first off, the commander has no business being a primary engager, and there's a couple of reasons why. It's not their job. First off, like, yes, do they need to come in sometimes? Sure, but they have so much power when they show up. They warp everything around them. Like when generals would show up on it's like out to an outlying area where I'd be like, oh God, oh no, why is this guy talking? He has no idea. He's so removed from the reality. We then have to go back and go, yeah, I know he promised you guys a new supermarket, but the reality is we all know we can't do that here. And like we had to go make that guy a liar, basically, because he was when he showed up. But in his mind, he's like this great leader. So commanders shouldn't be primary engagers. It should be people who are experts at that stuff. And we don't treat things like conversations like we do weapon systems. If I said to you, hey, let's break down all the weapons on your tank and get them assembled and serviced and hit qualify on tables, there's all kinds of training, very specific training we can do to get your unit from here all the way up to qualifying and then being one of the best. There's not that for conversations. There's not that for using an interpreter. There's not that for partnering. We partner from a position of arrogance all the time. I mean, how often have you heard someone talk down to someone who they're partnered with? And you're just like, what are you doing? These guys, the thing I had the advantage of is I would stay. The units would rotate over the top of me and I would stay and the new ones would come in. And we all know they make the same mistakes, but they all leave believing they solved the war. But when you look at the whole picture, not even close. And so we have these doctrinal problems. It's not important that we win hearts and minds. We are the insurgents. We have to get hearts and minds for the government, for the police. If no one's calling the police, commander, you're failing because no one believes in your product. So you are like one of your main line items of your mission statement. You can't find the enemy to kill them. You can't close with them and kill them. It's just not going to happen. In some places, yes, of course, there's going to be a fight. But for the most part, you have to get that police force trained. And they're doing things like teaching people monkey flips and giving IVs. And the populace has no idea. They don't care. It's a huge failure.
Yeah, I remember seeing a video a couple of years ago. It was a documentary, and I actually had looked for this for a while back, and I wasn't able to find it again. But there was this really telling moment in it where there were Marines in the Sangin area of Helmand Province, and they were working with some of the some of the young soldiers, the Afghan soldiers. And it was a Marine. He was probably like a sergeant or a staff sergeant, and he was talking about like the importance of washing hands and things like that to these soldiers. And he was speaking through an interpreter, and the soldiers were they were kind of rolling their eyes, but they were, oh yes, yes, yes. And then as soon as they walked away, the soldiers were chatting away, and but then their conversation was translated. It was, why is this guy telling us this? We know how to wash our hands. And I thought, man, we lost there. Like at that moment, like we've completely lost this fight. So
and there's 1,000 of those stories. We brought you women tampons, and then the ladies are like, we have periods here. We're not animals, or we have a system that works.
Yeah, it's We've got a lot of work. If we're going to do these kind of missions, we need to really prepare for them beforehand. Which again that was a large focus of the report that I did last year. Is that we hadn't prepared for this at all, because we're preparing to fight the big war against China or Russia or something like that, which is like a really unlikely fight for us to actually have. But we don't spend any time, and we build, we completely orient our military force to that, very high end, low probability fight. And so then we're completely surprised and caught off guard when we end up having to go fight something at a much lower level in the overall spectrum of conflict.
Yeah, it's a problem. And then if you wish hard enough and train hard enough for a fight with China, you're also a whole lot more likely to get it. Like it's that World War I thing. Like, well, we're going to build up, you're going to build up. Oh, Russia's going to build up. Now we're mad, and then we build up, and it's just like nobody wins in that fight anyhow. I know we want a near pure fight, but honest to God, we really don't,
No one would win that, would win that fight. That would be truly awful, if it actually happened. But people talk about this all the time in Washington. They talk about that China or Russia fight. I mean, it's the constant topic of conversation and like every think tank presentation that you've ever seen. And and it's they talk about it like it can be won, and like somebody could come out on top and be able to have a stable world after that. Well, there was not a stable world after 1918. And, we still to this very day deal with the consequences of that. Hell, you and I in Iraq and Afghanistan, if you take the long view of history, we were there because of decisions that were made by Winston Churchill, way back in 1919 at during the Versailles treaty negotiations. It was somebody that had no real working knowledge of that region that just started drawing random lines on a map. And by the way, there was a really good option other than that, because T. Lawrence showed up in Paris in 1919, and he had a map drawn up about how the Middle East, the remnants of the Ottoman Empire should be carved up. And I did this is a number of years ago, like 2014, when I saw it was a CNN map that showed where ISIS, the territory that ISIS was capturing. If you looked at that to T. Lawrence's peace map that he created in 1919, they overlaid almost perfectly.
Yeah. It's funny, again, back to your cultural warrior thing. We're going to go to Iraq, but how many people could talk intelligently about Gertrude Bell for more than 10 seconds? And if you don't know who Gertrude Bell is, why are you running around Iraq talking to sheikhs? Here's a lady in the early 1900s who could cruise around Iraq and all of the greater Arabian Peninsula without any problem. She could ingratiate herself to the sheikhs, and we don't got time for that. Nothing to see here. And then Afghanistan, there's a wonderful book on it, explains how complex Afghanistan is by another author, and nobody ever reads it. It's just like, how can you claim to understand anything about any of this if you don't even know the big players in these things? This ethnography that Benedicte Grima does. It's incredible. It's incredible to hear her and what it takes to blend into this society and how to do it. And if you don't know those lessons and how complex village to village conflict goes, you got no business messing with it. You just stay home,
right?
Or plan on being there for 50 years and losing people every year. That's just how that's going to go.
Yep. Yeah, I was shocked at how many of the people that I worked with in Afghanistan had not read The Great Game, and they just did not. They didn't have any idea about the larger picture of what was going on in that region, and it was. And because of that, you're right. Those are our two choices. We can just leave right now, which is what we should do in Afghanistan, or prepare to stay there in perpetuity, basically,
right.
Because it's a problem we're not going to solve unless we have people in positions of real authority who truly understand the cultural, historical, linguistic, ethnic issues and factors that are at play in those situations.
One of the things too about this, you can be really good at it, but I would see a lot of State Department people come out with fantastic pedigrees. I went to, Georgetown, and then the Kennedy School of Government, and I'm super smart. And they would never know that they were the dumbest person in the room. They would never act like that. I would see these people roll their eyes at the Afghan leader, the government, roll their eyes at this person and say, no, you're doing it wrong. And it's like, wow, we got a big problem here, because you can't fix that. There's no fixing Afghanistan for us right now, maybe down the road somewhere. And then the person that comes in has to be able to stay there a long time. Stanley McChrystal didn't have the answer. He was doing a terrible job, and just being honest, General Austin, now Secretary Austin, he didn't know what the hell he was doing. I would say that to these guys' faces because I was on the ground seeing the results of their plans, and it was all jacked up. People weren't prepared. And if a general can't get his troops prepared, he's wrong. It's just simple as that. You had people that came down range that were prepared for a completely different fight. And,
right.
And you can say advise and assist brigade, or you can talk about counterinsurgency, but again, it's not us getting the hearts and minds. It's how do you get hearts and minds towards the government? And if you're not working on that goal every single instant, then you're losing every single day. We lost the affect fight from day one. We constantly lost the response to stimuli, right? So I wanted to ask you, I know you're a John Boyd guy, so am I. One of the things I've learned is that there's an actual theory I didn't learn. I independently created this, something that already existed. So I'm like Christopher Columbus. But if you take the OODA loop and you start at D, decide, act, observe, orient, you get a different outcome doing the stuff that I would do. I would go out I don't know what I don't know, but I come in going, I blank slate, tabula rasa. I come in and I act and go, holy shit, that's too much of my ego in this. So I back out, or I would take a unit would say, hey, we have the answer. And it's like playbook page 522, sub B. We're going to employ this tool. And then I would say, hey, guess what? The last 5 units have done that. Let's do it. But let's we've already done this deciding action. Let's orient off of their mistakes. Why don't we have these things here? Why is this route closed? Why aren't there radios? Why aren't people going crazy for the Americans if we've done this the last 5 years in a row? And we struggle with that because we already struggle with OODA loops, but then if you start it in a different sequence, it gets even harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've obviously devoted about 50 times the brain power of even thinking about the OODA loop as most people who actively write about it online have, which is a good start, because I see a lot of people that write about John Boyd's work who have never really taken the time to really contemplate what the larger concept was behind that. But yeah, it's an interesting thing because the services, the Marine Corps in particular, because that's where I was introduced to that concept, does a really good job of talking about it and at the brochure level, and but actually implementing these ideas is a completely different story, and it's where we really fall flat on our faces.
If you think about taking a platoon of Marines and you want to make them an efficient fighting force, that takes a given number of years with raw Marines with some good NCOs and everything, a good number of years. And that's spending a lot of time training on it, going out into the field and practicing hard practice. We don't do that for the non-lethal stuff, and when Peter Van Buren talks about lines of efforts, there's no cultural line of effort. What's map? Like, how many times did I get asked how many schools are in the Valley? And I would get asked by the American partner, who's like, hey, I need to know in this Valley where Muhammad, my partner, is, I need to know how many schools there are. And my response would be, ask your partner, because what's the point of me looking this up and telling you if we're going to do this every single year? I don't know how many schools there are. That guy does. He knows where they are, how they go to school, and he can find out, and he needs to find out. Have him call an education sure if it matters to you. Does education sure matter to you, sir? No, it does not. We don't care about education. But we refuse to do that. And it's not because we lack the capacity. We can absolutely do a better job of this, but we just don't ever train for it. Like, we're serious about it.
Right. Well, and even asking about the numbers is another big issue that we have, that the U.S. military has, because he was asking about the number of schools. Did he ever ask how well those schools work? Right. Because you can't brief that. You can brief a number that we built 35 schools in this particular province, and that will shine on someone's billet accomplishments on their fitness report. Yes. It doesn't, and at that point, it doesn't matter if those schools are actually functioning and if students are really being taught anything.
So yeah, that's going back just a little bit. We were talking about the just sitting and talking to people. Well, it's another thing that kind of again goes against the institutional culture of the military. If a commander's walking around and he sees Marines, pulling if we're pulling our 50 cals off of the tank, and he walked past and he saw us, breaking down the 50 cals and cleaning them and putting them back together, or just doing, disassembly and
good
assembly
Marine
drills.
work. Yeah,
that's good Marine work. If he comes around and he sees, and sees my Marines, sitting up against the wall, smoking cigarettes and talking with their Afghan counterparts, he's going to think he's a slacker, when in reality, in that kind of a situation, that's probably much, much more important to the overall strategic goals that we have than the Marines that are messing around with their machine guns. And you can try explaining that to some people, till you're blue in the face, and they will not understand that, because we just, we prioritize the tangible, and we prioritize the things that look like hard work, but the real work that might not look like hard work is often dismissed as being frivolous and just a waste of time.
This is where I made a lot of my money is that effect over affect thought. It's always got to be affect over effect. And so we would do that performance of kids going to school, and I would go along and I would be like, this is great. You guys are all going to have your storyboard. Mine's going to be totally different, because I'm going to go talk to that dude and I'm going to say, what's going to happen here tomorrow when I come back? And that guy's going to be like, there's not going to be anybody here. And I'm like, how often do kids come to school around here? He's like, they go to school all the time. They go to school at home, or they go to school here. This is how we educate our kids. Is that good enough? Fuck no, it's not good enough. We're desperate for your guys' help, but we have to do this today. So actually, I came out of the field to make sure I'm here to part, And so you have this disrupting moment. It's why commanders shouldn't be primary engagement people, and it's so distracting. So I get that report, and then I go back and validate it the next day and be like, there's nobody here. So there you go, boss. And I say that to the commander. I'm like, is this the outcome you want? No, it's not, Pete. What do I need to do? I don't know, but I can go ask more questions. You tell me when you know what you need to do, And then I would go out and I would find more questions, because we'll find more answers to those questions, because there are things they want to work on, and they'll tell you exactly where it is if you listen and let them tell you,
Right. Well, that reminds me of a story from Afghanistan where, and my Afghanistan experience was nowhere near as interesting as my Iraq experience, because I was the watch officer for a regimental combat team. So I just sat behind five computer screens, 12 hours a day when I was over there. But it did give me an interesting perspective on what was going on in our battle space. And one day we had on a drone feed, we saw smoke coming out of part of a village, out of a building in a village. And then, we were asked, well, what is that building? And then we found out that it was one of 5 little police stations in that village, or in that, and everyone lost their minds that, it had been overrun, and how do we lose ground and all of that. And so everybody just went crazy trying to find answers to this, like why did that get overrun? And then we finally found out that no, it hadn't been overrun. The police that were stationed there actually left, and they moved to they went from 5 outposts to 4. And well, how why did they do that? They didn't get permission from us to do that. And it was just this long, whole drawn out process to try to get to the answer, which was that outpost didn't make any sense to the commander on the ground. And, he made the determination, the Afghan commander made the determination that this is a better setup. And and there was a whole bunch of people like I never stepped foot in that village. I had no idea about that, and I know that a lot of the people that were above me in this whole process hadn't been there either. But yet they were second guessing the judgment of this Afghan commander, and that was emblematic, I think, of most of what happened in both Iraq and Afghanistan, unfortunately.
Yeah, man, it's it is emblematic of it, because we struggle with these things. So, and I've told this story before in the show, but not enough people listen to it, and it hasn't people don't say it loud enough back to me, so I'm going to keep saying it. There was a thing called the RIA in Afghanistan, and when it was let's call it a quarterly, sometimes trimesterly assessment of the region and how we were doing. And I know you probably know all this stuff already, Dan, but this is for the audience. And so we would all sit around and we go, schools, hospitals, government, and we just go down the list, ding, 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 ding. And then I would always, because here's my job is to be the guy that asked that ground truth question, and then raise my hand. And I would say, is this a meeting where we can actually ask questions, or should I just be quiet? Because, you got to ask, because sometimes you say something and everybody gets mad. And they're like, no, we want to know. We got to assess this. We really got to do a good job. Why are there no Afghans in this room? Well, it's classified. Okay, let's not talk about classified shit. I mean, we're assessing their stuff. Shouldn't the governor be here? All the governors, the hospital workers, should we not include them in this? And they never got it, Dan. They never got it. I mean, not a surprise. But
no, it's not at all, unfortunately. And my laughter of that is tragic, because it's just, you just throw up your hands at these, these kind of things. But again, because we hadn't prepared for any of this, and because this, these kind of missions really do not fit within the institutional culture of the services, we're gonna continue making these mistakes, and and as long as our political leadership, decides, is gonna decide to send the military into these kind of situations, it's incumbent upon them to make sure that the services, take the necessary steps to prepare for these, so we can hopefully avoid some of them at the very outset.
Can we though?
So I think the SFABs are a good first step, and if it's if the SFABs are given the right people, because you always have to start with that. You have to make sure that you have the right people in those positions, and then they are then given the freedom and the resources to take the steps that they need to do in order to prepare themselves. Then I think it could work. So whether or not they're going to be allowed to do that, that's yeah. I mean,
I want to show you
as long as official Washington likes to prioritize, buying F-35s and Zumwalt class destroyers that end up getting canceled after 3 hauls, then yes, it's going to be really difficult for an organization like the SFABs to be allowed to do what they need to do.
I want to transition into some of these higher end weapon systems in a second, but first I want to show this slide here. This is something that you are not going to see anywhere else, because no one else knows how to do this. This is what I learned how to do. First off, the main quote, let me pull this thing down for a second. The main quote that I learned in all of Afghanistan, there were 2 things. I learned from a general, ground truth. I can never get enough of it. I have to know what the reality is, because then I'll know what to do. And that was General Wolf, who was a division commander in Iraq when I was there. And I'm like, got it, copy. If that's what you need, then that will work for everybody on the whole way up. So that's when I focused on ground truth. And the second was an Afghan governor who said, there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. And God damn it, who's the sword going to be, sir? Well, better be that Afghan governor. Well, then that's our main goal. How do we tease out that? Because we've already smashed that person for years and stomped on them and not let them lead. How do we get out of our own way to let them lead? And here's what that looks like. So this is a governor's plan, and you can see, and I've written this thing out. And just for the audience, if you're happy looking on the video side, if you're on the podcast side, I'll include this in the show notes. But basically, it's a prioritized timeline of projects that require our assistance, projects that we dominate and they need a lot of our help, projects where we don't have to do a damn thing. And so it's on us to decide what we want to get into, what we don't want to get into. With this whole thing, Dan, and the reason why I show this is that I took this down, took notes, took a couple hours to get this figured out from the guy. And then I scrambled it up and I put it into PowerPoint wrong. I E4'd it. And I gave it to him and he's like, no, God damn it. And he fixed it. He corrected everything back to the original form. So I knew that it was a valid plan, and he would wave this plan around to his people. He's like, this is what we're doing. The Americans are on board. We're going to do this. And they're like, well, goddamn, if you can do all that stuff, let's do it. In 6 months, okay. We didn't get any of it done because the system is just too broken. But you never see anything like that. You never see someone say, I've extracted the governor's plan, and it doesn't involve a lot of us doing anything. It's like us bringing water, or can we borrow your backhoe? Stuff like that. Simple shit. But we don't ever even think to ask and develop a plan. We always want it to be like, he wanted our parachutes because we got airdropped. Just give me your parachutes. I can turn those into influence. You can? Well, shit. Here you go. And we need all your cardboard. I need cardboard. You can't get me enough cardboard. If you need cardboard, you want us to bring you 5,000 pounds? No. I just need the cardboard that you have. Don't give me a whole, because we would overdo it. And so we learned how to do a lot less and make this guy more effective. We still bumbled it up. We still screwed it up. But that's how you start with these things. That's not being taught at the SFABs.
No, probably not. The doing less is, goes right back to that, that bias for action piece that's taught at the, from the very beginning for, like everybody in the services. One of my favorite sayings is sometimes the best course of action is no course of action. Yeah. Well, try convincing an Army colonel of that. Like, this is what I need you to do, sir. I need you to sit in your office for the next 12 months. Yes. You can read books, you can watch movies, you can do whatever you want, but I need you to just stay there and not mess around with anything. Yeah. There's not a single person that gets promoted to that position that's even constitutionally able to do something like that. Yeah. And until we have people that can operate like that, we will never ever get these things right.
Okay, that puts a good bow on that. Anything else you want to say about that ground truth related stuff at all?
No, although I'm sure we could keep going about this for a long time.
And I probably should have shut up more, but I just get so fired up because I'm desperate to help the SFABs, and I can't even get audience with those guys. They don't even. Yeah. And then when they do talk, be like, "That's so good. We'd love to have you back." And I'm like, "Good, cut a check." They're like, "We're gonna do it." And then it never happens, You can't help. Well, that's why I don't believe in the concept,
Yeah. Well, they're pretty busy too, because you don't see a lot of news about them, but every time I do see news about it, they're getting ready to deploy, this place or that place, and I kind of worry about that, because I think for a lot of it's obviously important to get field experience, but for what you need them to do, you need a lot of guys like going to schools, and you need a lot of guys that are, just sitting and studying, and
this work is born on the back of mistakes, constant mistakes, until you get better. That's practice. You have to make these mistakes. It's better to make them in Albuquerque or, Santa Fe or somewhere other than like, a live combat environment. Go make that mistake in Paris instead,
Right.
Let's talk about big weapon systems.
Sure.
So how does the Air Force stay relevant beyond being a delivery, being UPS? And then the Navy, they're always desperate to have the next greatest thing. It's going to be invisible to missiles. But, no ship has crossed a T in combat in 75 years.
Right. Yes. That's very true. I'm a big advocate for a much larger subsurface fleet than a surface fleet. I'm not a naval officer. I'm a Marine Corps officer, but I firmly believe in that submarine maxim that in naval combat there are submarines and there are targets, and yes. The idea of us sending a large surface task force into heavily defended waters in off the coast of China is ridiculous. They're gonna be spotted from a long distance away, and they're gonna be engaged from a long distance away. And so the only way to really solve that problem is not to get entangled in it. So I think a larger submarine force goes a long way to solving some of those problems. But again, to get to that point, you have to have a shift that was akin to the basic, the moment that the battleship was eclipsed for the
the aircraft carrier. Well, what did it take for us to get to that point in the United States? I mean, really in all naval combat, like it took half a dozen plus battleships sunk at anchor at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, in order for us to make that intellectual leap from the age of the battleship to the age of the aircraft carrier. Well, I'm scared to death that the only way that we're going to be able to make this next big leap in naval thinking is to see an $18 billion aircraft carrier with about $12 billion worth of aircraft, not to mention 2,500 sailors, 2,500 plus sailors, on their way to the bottom of the ocean to make that next big leap. But that's a core tenet of our of our brand of military reform, is we really work to try to shift some of these mindsets without having to go through that pain. You look back at some of the great military reformers. One of the best ones ever in history is Scharnhorst, who he'd been arguing for reform of the old Frederick the Great military system for years. But then when Napoleon invaded Prussia in 1806, and he was able to completely crush the old outmoded Frederick the Great system and humiliate the Prussians. And it was only when that happened that the powers that be finally turned to Scharnhorst and his friends Gneisenau and Clausewitz and said, okay, yeah, maybe you guys are right. We do need to change. And so what do we need to do? So I really hope that we can reform military thinking in the United States without having to go through that kind of pain. But it's a very difficult proposition.
I mean, there's nothing more powerful than a carrier group showing up off your coast. That changes the dynamic. Everybody in the region's got to chill out a little bit because there's a lot of resources directed at you, but it's got to stay above the water. That carrier group, and it's expensive. And then the Navy does shitty things to each other, like that captain who said, "Hey, we got to get everybody off this ship. We got COVID. It's going to kill people." And I don't know right or wrong, but the Navy lost its mind, and people are like, well, now we're exposed. Here come the Chinese. They're going to attack, and it's like, what are you guys doing? Yeah. I mean, you look in retrospect now, like he was smart to get those people off to take whatever steps. Was it within the military norm? I don't know, probably not. But when we look back now, he looks a lot more like a good commander than the guy that we're hearing about being, I don't know, some kind of ego-driven guy. And maybe he is that guy, but look at how the Navy responds, and how the Secretary of Navy responded to this thing. How is that institution going to ever get out of its own way long enough to get this stuff right? Because here's the thing. If we have 11 aircraft carriers and the rest of the world has less than that, they're going to find ways to beat us without aircraft carriers because they have to.
They are.
Yeah.
Of course they are. Well, and that's, goes back to a cultural thing for the Navy, in that they needed to keep those aircraft carriers there. Because they need to keep carrier task force all over the place, just for the simple fact that it helps justify their existence. And it's why they say we need to have 11 aircraft carriers. And because if anybody figures out that, oh, hey, guess what? The world's not going to end if we do not have an aircraft carrier in position for, this amount of time, then it becomes really difficult to then, to maintain that 11 number, particularly when we're spending $18 billion a pop to build a super carrier. So now it does seem that there's a little bit of a shift. The idea of having super carriers is certainly coming into question, and the future of the Ford aircraft carrier program in particular is somewhat in doubt at this point. But it remains to be seen if that actually happens. Just because of the nature of how weapons are procured and the way that support for them is created on Capitol Hill by scattering military contracts all over the country to as many different congressional districts as possible.
Yes.
So, because that's another big problem, is that that this is not, that these decisions are not all up to the service leaders, because they have a lot, rightly and wrongly, quite frankly. There's sometimes the services want to do really bad things, like cancel the A-10, and they're stopped by members of Congress. But then there are other times when the services really do want to, take prudent steps, but because of parochial, financial interests on Capitol Hill, they're stymied.
The A-10 thing as a ground guy, drives me crazy when they try to kill that thing, because part of the reason why, the high-end jets that are modern suck at this is that they can't stay on station. They are more fragile. They break more. That you can shoot that thing all you want. If there's a firefight, I want that thing there, because it makes. I've seen the Kiowa fly over our patrol, and every Afghan in the area dove to the ground. And this is a small helicopter, a dangerous helicopter, but a small helicopter. Now imagine that A-10 flying overhead. This is a different kind of party.
Yeah.
And I've seen fast movers fly in and fire on an enemy during an engagement that I'm in, and it's incredible. It's awesome, but it's over before you even know it started, because it's all supersonic and everything, and it doesn't have the same head down, oh my God, what's that kind of feeling from that thing. And yet the people who never are on the ground are saying that thing they can do it with something else. I've not seen that. I've not seen the fear in people's eyes when that thing flies overhead, or a Kiowa, something that can hang out. And it makes the battle three-dimensional, much more so than everybody being on the ground,
Right.
And not as expensive as an F-22, 35, 64, whatever kind of F, thing you have in front of it. Those things are billions of dollars, from cradle to grave.
Exactly. Well, even more importantly than that, with the A-10 is the the way it was conceived. Like, that was a program from the very beginning that was built based on practical combat experience, and it was designed from the very first sketches all the way to the last rivet, as they were driven in Hagerstown, Maryland, where they were finally assembled. It was designed with that. The technology came later. This is how we're going to operate with this. This is what we needed to do. So let's take available, proven technology to make that happen, which is not the way that the marquee, like, really expensive weapon systems today are built, because they're built with a bunch of, they start with the technological wish list, and then and then they're built up from there. And I remember coming across, I guess it was General Neller, when he became the commandant. He put out a document right after he took over from General Dunford, and in his document, in this white paper, he said that, all right, now that we have the F-35, we need to figure out how to use it. And
yeah, right.
Like, it's a failed program. Like, you should already know exactly what you need from a weapon system from the very beginning, and then you design to that. You don't get it and then figure out what you're going to do with it. Because it's the really revolutionary types of military technology. It's centuries between times that's happened. These are marginal improvements. Like, at the end of the day, something like the F-35, it's just a plane. It does exactly the same thing. It has the exact same that the Sopwith Camel did back in World War I. It takes off, it flies around, it hopefully finds a target, and then it fires off some kind of ordnance. And the final effect is a boom on the ground. The same exact thing that aviation has been doing for 100 years is what the F-35 does. It does it a little bit differently. The processes that happen in the course of creating that effect are different, but the ultimate effect is exactly the same. So the fact that we've wasted now, I mean, we're what, 25, 26, 27 years almost into the JSF program from the time it was conceived to where we are now. And we still, and the F-35 is still nothing more than a really expensive prototype. And we've spent we're coming up on, it's good. Well, if the current trajectory keeps going and we keep buying them in the numbers that are planned, we're talking well over almost $450 billion to develop and procure that fleet, to say nothing of the $1 trillion plus that it's going to take to to keep it operating for the next 50 years or so that they're planning on right now.
And you certainly wouldn't call it a robust platform, like in terms of being able to get back up in the air. I mean, these things are delicate. These are Formula One cars, that can't take a real hard beating, which impacts commanders' decisions. I don't want to break this thing. I'm down 25%, and if I get down to 35%, oh my God, how am I going to support all the missions and everything? We're not talking about fights. We're talking about just to be able to fly. I'm going to minimize what they do. Fly in a racetrack in the sky above, a very safe place before they have to go somewhere, maybe. And that creates problems. The other thing that creates problems, and I'm glad you brought this up, I want to get back into it, is the political pressure on this. I mean, I don't know how many congressional members run on less high-paying military jobs in their district, but I bet that list of people is really short, and I bet the list of people going on the other direction is long,
Yes, it's very, and I've seen this in action in Washington, because I go up to Capitol Hill and I talk to people, and I'm not going to tell you which side of the Capitol this is on, or certainly not who I was talking to, but I will say it was a chief of staff, and we were having a conversation that involved the F-35. It wasn't specifically about the F-35, but it involved the F-35, and I was told in no uncertain terms that, look, we can't be seen to be coming out against the F-35 because it's worth 1,000 jobs to us.
Right. 1,000 jobs. It's a lot.
Right.
It's a lot of high-paying jobs.
Well, actually, there's a lot of questions about that, because some of them, a lot of the jobs that that are involved in the defense industry can be very high paying, but the way that these are calculated are you can have a person who spends an hour in a year doing some work that has some minor adjustment on one of these programs, and that's counted as a job. And because if you can go to Lockheed Martin's website for the F-35, and they have the economic impact section on it, and there's a map that you can interact with that'll show you how much money is invested in this particular state and how many jobs it creates. And you look at it and you're like, wow, that is a lot of people that are, on its face, it looks like they're completely dedicated to this, when no, they probably work like an hour a week, building transparencies that are eventually going to go in the F-35. But a lot of the rest of their work is focused on building transparencies for other aircraft. But yet it's counted as a job. And people are given the impression that their entire professional life is dedicated to this one program. So, but there's a lot of people that want you to believe that, because that helps justify the continued investment in some of these programs that are of, let's say, dubious combat value.
Yeah, at 2 point whatever it is now billion for an A2 or a B1 bomber. Sorry, a B1 bomber. How many invisible warplanes do we need?
Well, the B-2 bomber is the one that's that's $2+ billion. That's a great question. I can actually there's a much larger argument to be made about the value and the continued relevance of the bomber. But the number of manned bombers that need to be able to penetrate heavily defended airspace to bomb targets deep within enemy territory there's a good question involved in that, because we have enough standoff weapons to be able to strike targets deep within enemy territory that does not involve flying a person over through that heavily defended airspace. Yeah. So it's a great question. Now we still don't know a whole lot about the B-21 that's supposed to be built here, and I think the plan is for more than 100 of them, and it's a good question.
A lot of invisible airplanes.
Right. Do we really need that when we have things like cruise missiles and long range artillery rocket artillery that can strike targets. I mean, the big challenge, that has absolutely consumed Washington for the last 5.5 years that I've been here working on these issues is the A2AD threat from China, which some of their anti-ship missiles have ranges of 3,000 3,000 miles basically. And if they can build long-range munitions and hit a small target at that distance, why can't we? Why are we building aircraft that are meant to cut that distance so we can drop a gravity bomb on a target?
Yeah. And then how is a platform like the U-2 still viable? I mean, this has got to be, I mean, it's not as old as the Ma Deuce, but that's a mechanical gun. I can see why that thing's still around. But here's a 70-year-old plane that's still every day. And
still
we have
relevant.
satellites. So
if you watch the Super Bowl, you watch the B-52 flying over at the beginning of the game. That's been flying since 1952. And it's probably going to still be flying in 2052. So there's nothing inherently wrong with old aircraft, which is another one of these issues that I have to constantly debunk in Washington. If you have a well-designed aircraft and you maintain it properly, then it can continue flying. Like, one of my favorite statistics are there are 400 DC-3s. First flown back in I think the 1930s, if I remember correct. I don't remember the exact date. There are still 400 of them flying and making money for their owners today in 2021. Wow. So, like, again, if they're designed right and they're maintained properly, then these things can continue working for a long time. I actually had the opportunity in 2005 to fire the last working gun in the Marine Corps inventory from World War II. It was a 105 millimeter howitzer that was used as a training aid in Quantico, and I got to pull the lanyard on it. The only time I pulled the lanyard on an artillery piece, but it was a gun that was used in Guadalcanal. So again, take care of some of these things, and they'll work for a very long time. The Ma Deuce is probably one of my favorite examples. I fired that a whole lot more, and that's a lot of fun.
And that thing is as good as it was on day one. I mean, a little bit of refinement here and there along the way, but I mean, anybody from 1919 that fired that thing would be able to walk up and fire it today.
Yeah,
and it would be a goddamn good weapon. The other one I think about with that is the C5. I know that the C-17 might be slightly better, but they're not getting rid of those C5. They keep fixing them and flying. I mean, maybe there's an end date coming up here soon, but those things, when you want to move a lot of stuff, it's the king,
Well, and that is one of the most valuable missions that the Air Force has, is moving cargo like that, in some of those big aircraft. I know that one of the greatest sights that I ever saw in my entire life was that C-17 flying me out of Iraq in at the end of October 2007. So I certainly appreciated that quite a bit.
I mean, it's a long conversation, one we could probably tee up and do completely differently the next time, but I've had you for an hour. But when I think about these things and our desire to build this all possible, like this omnipresent military force that can do any job, it's like I would like us to get more things right and do less things, and you're right that the bias action, like our platform is always this arrow that goes up, and along our stay there are all these operations that we do, and that inexorably leads to winning. And go ask anybody who's done a tour, and they're gonna be like, yeah, we did a great job, we absolutely won. But then when Pete is there and he sees the next unit, doesn't even care about your legacy, doesn't realize anything you've done. It's the laws of stability are really powerful, and instability is the norm. And the moment you leave that elastic band, it's gone. Let's go. And they're going to go build their new band. And it's really hard to get by these things, partly because we don't spend enough time in the space that we're trying to improve. We don't spend enough time understanding it specifically. And then we have so many other competing factors to limit our ability to reliably win, like districts needing jobs or whatever. I don't know that we can reliably compete even in a peer-to-peer fight?
That certainly remains to be seen. So, and that's a thought that keeps me up at night, and that's what motivates the work that I do. Is making sure that we make good, prudent choices in really everything that the military does. From the weapons that it buys to the people it brings into the service, to the people that it promotes in the service, to the ideas that they wield. John Boyd, he taught us the right way, that the proper prioritization of what we layer in importance in the military. It's people, ideas, hardware, in that order. And far too often, it's exactly reversed in Washington. Yeah. And when you do that, then I think you really miss the ball, and you really endanger our national security, because you're going to make really bad decisions, and you're going to find out that this force that you've designed to fight a fight the way that you want to fight it is not going to materialize that way. And you're going to be caught flat-footed, and because everyone's paying attention to what we're doing, they've probably already figured out how to defeat the F-35 and things like that. And so we need to think differently, and it's a challenge making people understand that, and making people even understand that their thinking is wrong on these issues.
When people want to read more of your stuff, what's the best place to go to find more about Dan Grazier's work?
Sure, you can come to our website at the Project on Government Oversight, and you can look me up there. I'm also on Twitter at Dan_Grazier. You just Google my name and you'll pop up all kinds of things, probably with the F-35 next to it, since a large part of my work focuses on that program that is the perfect case study for all the pathologies surrounding American military procurement.
I love it. Well, thanks for coming on. Let's do another one, and because these conversations we can't have them enough. And every time we open up a mind to a new possibility on these things, we have a chance of making a difference,
Right. Yeah, no, this has been a lot of fun, and I'm only too happy to come back whenever you'll have me.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, stand by.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching.